at Wellesley, I really enjoyed the education. I had some great friends. They all had very specific passions that they wanted to explore. One was very much into anthropology. One was really into, actually into bugs, and ended up getting a PhD in ecology. And I didn't have those same passions. I felt like I had people in my life, like mentors that were lawyers, although like barely, like they had been a lawyer and then became a teacher. So I didn't actually know anybody who really practiced law. And I was sort of trying to figure out what was next. I was working in at the college in academic computing after I graduated. I don't know if that department still exists or if it merged, sort of, but generally doing IT type stuff. And my father died unexpectedly. And so that sort of really paused, because I was thinking I would be doing what some of you here on the chat have said, applying for the, for me, I would have been applying to work for a year and then go to law school. And so when he died in November, I quickly decided I would take an extra year off, and I was trying to settle his estate. I'm an only child, and my parents were legally divorced, but not emotionally divorced. And my mother was very angry with him when he died. And there was really only one living person to take that out on. So and settling his estate ended up being very stressful. So I thought, okay, I can be a far better lawyer than this guy. And, I thought I would go and do legal aid work and help people. And so that was kind of where I set off. And then I went ahead and I applied to law school, and ended up taking 2 years off, and then I ended up at Boston University School of Law. That's a moment for me to mention to you all, which you probably all know this. And so my experience at Wellesley was that it's asking me to admit someone, which I will, but I don't know if somebody else also has control.
I take care of that.
Okay.
All good.
I mean, to be honest, I was a little bit of a hayseed when I got to Wellesley, and I had a big learning curve. So maybe you guys all came and you were very cosmopolitan and you knew what was what. I definitely did not, and so I had a huge learning curve on that score, and really grew tremendously. But I worked really hard at the college. To get, to graduate, and I ended up graduating cum laude, but I really fought tooth and nail to get to that. And I say that just because law school was a totally different experience. Like once I got law school, I really, really got law school. And so what I wanted to tell you though is, I hate to say this, but it really pays to take an LSAT prep class. And I hate that about the testing industry, and I'm seeing it with my own kids with taking the SAT or the ACT, because I needed someone to teach me the tricks of the test. And so I don't know what the scoring is now, but when I took it, I got a decent score, but it wasn't like shoot the lights out score. And in fact, career services rightly said I should consider taking an extra year off to let that score drop off my record. So when I took the class, my score went up more than you're supposed to be able to cause your score to go up. And that was just because somebody really taught me all the tricks. So I hate that, but it depends on where you want to go to law school. And if you want to go to a better law school, they do look at those metrics. So the nice thing for me is I went to BU, which was incredible. Harvard then, anyway, I don't know about now, had a mandatory retirement age for their professors. So they let them have an office on campus, but they wouldn't necessarily let them teach, or they limited how much they would teach. So they came over to BU. The guy I had for contracts law my first year, the year I had him, he had taught 5 of the 9 justices on the United States Supreme Court's contract law. So I benefited from some tremendous professors. And then BU really got more selective in its admissions over the years. So it's a better law school now than it was when I got in, which also then just raises, the profile of people who went to BU. So I kind of really lucked out on all of those fronts. Just to give you the quick after that, I thought, as I told you before, I thought I would work in legal aid. I thought I would work for 2 to 3 years at a large law firm and make, tons of money and pay off my loans. And then I would go do the legal aid work. Well, I got to the large law firm. I did make more money than I could have imagined then, but I was making $69,000. So just to understand now, first year associates make they were making like 190, I think. And I say that only because our salaries are public as judges in Massachusetts. So I make I don't know, $50 over $190,000. So I do currently make more than a first year associate at a large law firm, but just barely, but I have better pension. And I have a lot more control over my schedule. So, I got to the large law firm and I loved it. And we were doing amazing, unbelievable, impactful pro bono work. And I was working with, incredibly smart, talented people and doing the pro bono work. So I was making the money and doing the pro bono work. I mean, that just doesn't get much better than that. And so 2 to 3 years somehow became 16 years. But all that time I was doing pro bono work, and I was doing work, all kinds of pro bono work. I represented tenants. We represented some elderly people who were defrauded of their money or their property, all kinds of different projects representing indigent people. But I was also doing work with gay and lesbian advocates and defenders, which is now GLBTQ legal advocates and defenders, so still glad. And working on the marriage equality cases and relationship recognition cases. And so after I'd been at the firm for about 16 years, one day GLAD called me and said they had an opening and they were wondering if I would consider leaving my equity partnership and going and doing that. I happened to be driving at the time of that call. I did not wreck my car, but really could have. I was shocked and somehow ended up saying yes to that. And I did that for about 5 years. But the pull to be a judge kept pulling. And I should just say, I did clerk for a judge in Vermont for the first year out of law school. And that you kind of get bitten by that idea of it's, being on the side of justice, trying to figure out the right answer, not the right answer for your client, trying to do justice, trying to be fair, trying to understand where you think the law is evolving. I mean, those things are all very exciting. And so I put in an application at the very beginning of the Baker administration, and then he nominated me. So.
That's so cool to hear. All of the little steps along the way, and especially the fact that you're making $50 more than a first year associate.
Right.
I worked for
60. It could be 60.
I worked for a large law firm for a few years as well. So I relate to that whole, wasn't really expecting to like it. Kind of surprised that I did. But I would love to hear, and I think we all would, what brings you the most joy about your work? And I'm thinking not only your current work, because you spoke a little bit about the bug to be a judge. So also about, your work when you were in private practice and then when you were at GLAD.
Well, so lawyers are competitive. There are some stereotypes that have bases in reality. Lawyers are very competitive. And so I grew up in a fairly drama-filled house. My parents were both alcoholics. They got sober towards the end of my time at Wellesley, or right as I was finishing Wellesley. So I was used to a lot of conflict, and I decided that the law could be perfect for me because I could get that conflict at work and then strive to have a home life that did not have that conflict. And so I was really well trained for a high conflict environment. And it was it's fun to fight for people or to advocate for people. I mean, whether they're actually, I just really like that idea of putting together your case, this puzzle you're trying to put together and you're trying to benefit your client. I will say at the beginning for me, probably the pro bono work was more meaningful, but as it turns out, I actually really like all areas of law. And so I found that I took those skills, those litigation skills, and applied them to different cases. And I because of my parents' alcoholism, I don't drink very often. I really can't, like, I get so high on a good win, or, you know, even now, even as a judge, you know, like, you know, crafting some great decision that wins the votes of my colleagues. Like, I just, you know, just recently, we try not to have dissents at my court, and you'll often hear, actually, on both the Supreme Judicial Court and my court, we're very collegial, even when we do dissent. And you'll hear people say that they've written dissents that never got published because the panel, you know, saw that you had a valid point and you worked out some other way to work out the case. But sometimes you do have to disagree with your colleagues. And so last year I dissented, I think dissented in full or in part, and I think 3 cases. And, you know, one of them was just kind of fun for me because it was a mom and pop store. And I just felt like the town wasn't being fair to them. I knew there was 0 chance the Supreme Judicial Court would take that case. But it was fun to, you know, point out what the town was doing that I thought was wrong, and also maybe point these people to a claim they could make that would succeed. But the other 2 cases that I wrote dissents on, the Supreme Judicial Court took those cases. So like that, I was so happy, you know, about those. I mean, it doesn't mean that they're going to go my way, but, you know, it's nice to say, you know, I flagged this thing and, you know, said, hey, really, you should look at this, and to know that they're doing that. So I was pretty excited about that.
You know, that brings up kind of a sub question. Keeping in mind that these are students who haven't been to law school yet, it might be helpful for you to tell them a little bit more about the nuts and bolts of when you say that it gives you, you know, such a rush to get the votes of your colleagues. How exactly does that process work?
Well, so I'm on the appeals court. So, you know, both on the federal system and on the state system, Massachusetts specifically, I mean, we have a 3-step process. You have a trial court, you have, and then you guys are probably all familiar with the United States Supreme Court. Well, in between there is an appeals court, actually, and because the country is so big, on the federal level, it's divided up among a bunch of different geographical groupings. And here in Massachusetts, we also have an intermediate or middle level appeals court, and that's what I'm on. So I have 24 colleagues. We sit in panels of 3, and so I have to get at least one other vote to go my way. If we do have a split decision like that, 2 to 1, then the decision actually gets circulated to our other 22 colleagues, and they get to vote and get to give me feedback too. So you get feedback from potentially 22 people telling you how to make your draft better. And so that's a vote that you would win or not win, right? And so what we do is, you know, at the trial, you're making your case either to a judge or a jury. And then when the case comes to us, we're really looking for mistakes. You're not retrying your case. You're saying there was something went wrong on the facts, or there was something that was an error of law, and that you should win. And 98% of cases in Massachusetts end in my court. The Supreme Judicial Court really only takes about 2% of the cases, and then they decide those cases. So our court hears everything other than first-degree murder. So we hear second-degree murder and manslaughter and any other kind of crime. That's about half of my work. And then we hear every other kind of case. So I could hear a land dispute between neighbors. I could hear a divorce. I could hear a breach of contract. You got injured in a medical malpractice situation. You want to build a house on a lot and the town didn't give you your permit. I mean, we hear any kind of case like that.
How do you make yourself an expert in so many different areas of law?
I'm working pretty hard right now. We do sometimes see the same issue. I would like to see the same issue more times, just because, you're trying to manage all the different cases. You do have hopefully you have briefing from the parties, but sometimes, a lot of times, people don't have lawyers, so they're really essentially getting some free legal advice, or information, as I like to say, because we're not allowed to give advice, but we explain the law in our writings. And we have one law clerk And we also, you know, I've been around, right? I mean, I've been practicing now for 27 years. And so, you know, that gives you some sense. And so I certainly know certain practice areas much better than others. But say I didn't come up on the criminal side, so I have to put in the extra footwork. You know, we have, I mean, we have a book that's like this thick that explains different motion to suppress issues, right? And I have to go, you know, do that research. I have to go read the cases to get myself up to speed on those things.
I'm taking you on a little bit of a tangent, but I think this might be interesting to our students. You said you have one law clerk. Is that a law student law clerk? And if so, how does that person work with you? What's that like for them?
Sure. So I have one law clerk who is a recent law grad. So they've finished law school, and in their first year after law school, typically they're working for me. Sometimes people take a mid-career break for various reasons, but we hire like a year out. So like in the fall, I would pick my clerk for the next September. So mostly it's people who've just graduated from law school or who are relocating, who want a clerk for a judge, because it's a great way to get to know the lawyers and the legal community. I also take law students, and every court has their own rules about that and how they apply, and we are sticklers and we are precise. That is both comforting and annoying. And so if we post a deadline, so for example, we'll post a deadline for when the law student intern candidates should apply. And if you don't meet that deadline, the woman who's in charge of that at our court won't tell me about you. But if you reach out to me directly, then I don't have a deadline. And if I haven't engaged somebody, then I might pick you. And in fact, actually, I've had a few Wellesley people. I often get interns from Boston University, sometimes from Northeastern. And one of my very first interns, it was funny because law school's 3 years, if you don't know that, traditionally. If you go at night, it might be 4 years. Vermont is the only state, and I haven't checked this in a while, but you don't have to go to law school. You just need to work for a lawyer for a certain amount of time and, quote, study the law with that lawyer and then try to get admitted to the bar. That does happen. And so, but anyway, one of my first interns, you know, I prefer to have a third-year law student because they know more, but I take second-year law students. So anyway, BU had sent me some names. I picked a second-year law student. Fine, I was set. And then I get this other resume, however it got to me, I don't remember. And I look at it, and it's me 30 years ago, right? I mean, it was Wellesley class, then she goes to BU. I don't remember where she was from, but I don't think it was from around here. And I was like, okay, I'm going to have a second intern because this is me, right? This is a young me. And so what's so funny about that is I did engage her. They're unpaid internships. So I did engage her, and she was graduating, and so she was applying. I don't usually hire my interns to be my law clerk because I figure they should go get other experiences. I mean, if they walked on water, I might, but otherwise I think it's better for them to, you know, make relationships with other people. So she was interviewing with my colleagues, and she kept not getting hired, and she kept not getting hired. And I mean, she started with a pretty senior person, so she was rejected like literally 15 times. And I'm like, am I not giving her a good enough reference? Like, I don't understand why she was not getting picked. She was a little quiet, but she just wasn't getting picked. And I just couldn't imagine getting passed over. You know, she knew she was going down the seniority, kept not getting picked. Well, meanwhile, the Supreme Judicial Court, which is the more prestigious court, one of them was a little slow in their hiring, and so they hired her. So it was great for her that she didn't get picked and didn't get picked and didn't get picked. And then the person who hired her retired, and one of my colleagues got picked to go to the Supreme Judicial Court. And so you take the clerks that were hired by your predecessor. So he had not picked her, right? So he comes to me and he's like, "You better have picked me a good law clerk." And I'm like, what? You know, so. And it turned out he loved her, absolutely loved her. And so she worked for him for a year, went off and did something else for a year, and then came back and worked for him for a second year, and now she's off doing other things. But yeah, so I've had a couple of Wellesley people who have come and interned for me. So I'm always happy to look at the resumes of people who went to Wellesley. I mean, you got to make your own luck.
definitely. Well, I'll get us back on track with our pre-written questions. What is something that has surprised you about your career?
I think, you have to constantly reinvent yourself, and that can be a little bit tiring. I think, it's not enough to go and do good work. You have to promote yourself. You have to get out and connect with other people. When I first started having to market, I'm not the, my wife was a consultant, so she was really used to making her own rules and literally actually writing regulations that did not exist and inventing a program. And so for me, going out and marketing, I found a little bit stressful, but it took a little while, and then I found that I actually liked it. So I was very surprised. And I was in charge of training for the litigation department at my firm, which was like a 220 person firm that, when I started out, that was a large firm. Now they've got these oversized international firms with 1,000 lawyers, but 220 was pretty big. And it was very funny because I had my son was probably 2 or 3, and my daughter's 2 years older than him, and was an early reader, and he was not so much with the reading. And so I'm doing this training program, and I'm trying to convince all of the young lawyers that they too can market, right? That this is a learned skill. And so I literally had associates in my office actually crying, saying they could never possibly learn the skill. And then I would give them my best talk that yes, they could, and try to break it down into small pieces for them. And then I would come home and I would have my son, who was 2 or 3, who was collapsed on my living room floor crying, convinced he would never learn to read. And it was that juxtaposition actually was very wonderful, because I could see that he would learn to read, and that the associates, if they wanted to, could in fact learn to market. It's just that you have to put in the footwork. So that was a surprise. So you can all market. I know you're all sitting there going, there's no way I can market. Yes, you can. That's a different talk though. I'm just gonna move because we have 2 pound hounds, and one of them is convinced that he has to be in the same room with me. So if I do not let him in, he will be crying more than he is now. So what else do you want to ask me?
Can you tell us about a time that you struggled in your career, and then how you got through that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are lots of times when you can struggle. When I first got started, my firm did represent some companies that I wasn't necessarily interested in representing. We represented Brown and Williamson. My dad smokes more than 3 packs a day, and as I might have mentioned already, he died very young, at 50, actually younger than I am now. And so I was happy to defend Brown and Williamson when the attorneys general around the country were suing them, because I felt like the statute of limitations had run, and I just thought it was ridiculous that the states were claiming somehow that they didn't know that tobacco or smoking was dangerous more than 3 or 4 years before those lawsuits were filed. I was like, I knew that in the 1976. How did you not know that? So I was happy to do those lawsuits. I didn't have a problem, any moral qualms about doing that. But I did not want to represent them in challenging regulations about how close billboards could be to an elementary school. I did not want to represent them in individual lawsuits. And so, I wrote a CYA, cover your butt, email to the partner explaining where my line drawing was. And, he was, I don't know. I mean, first he wrote and he was like, Vickie, a CYA email to me? And I'm like, yes, because I want to make sure you know what my limits are. I don't want to hear that I learned all about the company for this one lawsuit and now I have to do these other kinds of lawsuits. I mean, you have to sort of jump in there and stand up. And so that kind of stuff happens. You have to protect your own interests. That happens at 2 different law firms for me. Sometimes like someone will say, oh, I need you to work on this. And you're like, look, I'm really too busy. And then they'll say, oh, well, you can do it quick and dirty, and you don't have to write a formal memo, and just give me the results of your research. And so you do that, and they know the conditions of your work, and then they show your work to somebody else, and the other person was like, this is outrageous. It's not a polished memo. It's not right. And if you don't have those conditions, written down to protect yourself, you can end up with some partner who's very much criticizing you, and, you have to deal with that. I think one of the times that was the hardest in my career is I was very close to being up for partner. And this partner told me to call up a brand new client that did not know me and ask them for their source code for their key product. And I said, you know, this is not going to go well. They don't know me. You're asking me to ask them for like their crown jewels, the most valuable thing their company has, and they're going to freak out. And he had all these reasons why he couldn't do it and I should do it. And, you know, so having tested the general, I said, okay, I would go do this. And so I did it, and it went about as well as I predicted. I mean, the client freaked out and was irate and was on the phone and blah, 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 blah. So, you know, we smoothed that all over. And then a few months later, I'm up for partner and he says, I don't know how to handle a client, right? Because he had me do this completely stupid thing. You got to remember, this was 20 years ago, right? And I still remember this. This is how bad it was, right? And so this partner who was mentoring me and helping me become a partner was like, you have to go apologize. And I'm like, what? You know, she's like, you need to go apologize to him. I'm like, I didn't do anything wrong. So we had a whole role play about how I could, you know, accomplish what she and he would consider an apology without betraying my values and get through that conversation so he would be calmed down and so he wouldn't be an obstacle to me being a partner. You know, but all kinds of stuff happens. I mean, when I was coming back from maternity leave with my second child, you know, and he was literally 12 weeks old, and yes, you know what you're doing with the baby because it's your second child, but on the other hand, you've never had two before, and you know, you're exhausted, you're not, you know, you're not getting good sleep, etc. And this partner I was working with just shut off like a light switch. He just said, I've got to retire. And everybody assumed it was because he had some health issues, so no one would challenge him. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm 12 weeks out from having a baby. Could you just give me another month? And he was like, no. And you know, that's like, life happens. You just deal with that. Or you have a judge yell at you. You know, you just have to keep politely, I will say, and respectfully say, Your Honor. And you know, you've got to make your record. You know, I mean, when I was maybe a fifth-year associate, I was representing this person in a domestic violence case where we were, my person had gotten a restraining order and now the other person had run into court and they wanted a restraining order. And we have a law here that says that that second order is a mutual order, and a judge cannot enter a mutual order unless they make written findings of fact. There's a very specific reason why we have that law, which is that abusers often try to get a retaliatory order to try to control their victim. And then if the police are called, both people get arrested, which is very traumatic. So there's lots of reasons why we don't want judges to just say, oh, you guys should stay away from each other. I'm just going to issue both of you an order. So, you know, the judge was like, I'm entering this order, and I'm explaining to him that the law does not allow him to do that. And so when the hearing first started, it was like he was patting me on the head like little girl, blah, blah, blah. And then as he's ruling against me and I'm very patiently objecting and telling him that he can't do what he's doing and that he has to make written findings. And then, you know, by the end of the hearing, he was calling me ma'am and yelling at me and yelling, in fact, actually, I will make written findings for the tape. And then he starts dictating oral findings, which are not written findings, you know, and then you appeal. I mean, there was no, I get it. He's a super busy judge. He's not the only one who wants to do that. I didn't think he was a bad person or some sort of moral failing. I just needed to represent my client and make my record and then go to the appeals court and get the appeals court to say that you can't do this. And that's what I did. So then it was, from my point of view, it was great he was ruling against me, because then I got to go get my first appearance in the Massachusetts appeals court and get a win.
I guess that's a silver lining.
Yeah, exactly.
What is the best piece of career advice you have received? Or what's the best piece of advice you could offer to these students?
I think you've really got to get connected to other people. And I didn't really appreciate that as much when I was at Wellesley, and I certainly didn't appreciate it as much as I wish I had in law school. Like, there's just the part about it's nice to have friends. It's good to have a safety net because stuff happens, unexpected things happen, law firms implode, economies, pandemics happen. Like, it's just good to have a network. And I used to think that, you know, like marketing was like, oh, you're asking somebody else to do you a favor by hiring you. And that's really not the right attitude. It's more like, no, we can help each other, or, hey, it would be fun to work together, or wouldn't it be great to problem solve on that? And so, you know, you, I cracked up many years ago. I was at my firm and I get this phone call from this guy that I went to law school with. And I can assure you, he and I did not like each other in law school. We are very different people with very different views of the world. But he was in a pinch from California, and he needed to send his client to a really good attorney. And you don't, if it's your client, you do not want to risk connecting them to a bad attorney. And so even though he and I didn't agree on a lot, you know, he knew I was a very good attorney. And I thought, you know, he is too. So I was like, okay, I can work with this. Right. So Massachusetts is a very small world. And so you get out there and you start making connections, and you ask people to connect you, and that's just fine. It's not a bad thing. It's a great thing.
That's definitely a lesson that takes a long time to learn. I know for me, it definitely did, but that's how I've gotten my last 3 jobs. So I completely agree.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's also a component of something I said earlier, which is you do have to make your own luck, right? You have to keep, figure out what you want. That may not always be clear, but at some point you might start to figure out things that you want, and then you figure out how you're going to get them, right? And I don't know, I see so many, really, actually, I thought we would get gender equality by raising women up to where men were, but it now seems like we're getting gender equality by bringing men down to where women are. So men now seem to have more self-esteem issues, and we're certainly loading on some childcare responsibilities, which is good. So, like I see a lot of people who apologize and who feel bad, and I'm like, stop doing that. Like, figure out what it is you want, and then you have to practice, you have to put in the footwork. So I see all these people, younger people, who are not confident, and I get that, right? And a lot of women, even my age, still have moments of suffering with that. So I would really encourage you to put some energy in right now to stop doing that to yourself. And the way that you build that confidence is you do your homework, right? So that's what I said. I'm working pretty hard right now on certain kinds of cases. I go do my homework so that when I go to agree or disagree with my colleagues or write something, I feel confident about what I'm putting out there. And also, you know what? If you mess up, everybody messes up, right? I mean, as long as you're not messing up because you have a bad heart or an evil motive, and you reflect on why you messed up, then you'll probably be okay. So, like, just to give you an example of that, when I was an associate, so I was much younger, I was much closer to your age. I mean, I was probably still 30, but I'm 53 now, so 30 was closer to you are. And I worked next to this busy partner, and he used to deliberately give too much responsibility to associates and then see how they dealt with it. And so and I would see them, and I would see it, right? So the ones who were panicking and running to him and stuff, he was not going to keep working with them. And so I was like, okay, clearly that's not the path for success with him. So now I don't know what I'm doing either. So what I would do is I would either, depending on the situation, I would give him a memo, or I would leave him a voicemail, or I would write an email, and I would say, this is the decision we need to make. Here's the information I think you need to make it. If I don't hear from you, this is the decision I'm going to make. And that was it, right? And then if I didn't hear from him, I executed. And that ended up being this profound learning experience for me, because when he didn't want to do what I was suggesting, he would come in, usually holding a printout of my email or holding my memo, and he would say, I could see why you want to do this, but here's what I want to do, and here's why. And so I learned. But the buck stopped with me. Like, if he didn't come back to me, I was making a decision and moving on because I had to. So, take charge. Like, so those people that were running around freaked out, like, they were waiting for him to do something. Don't do that. You make decisions for you, and you decide what you want, and you go start to implement them, and you give other people the opportunity for input, but you are moving forward. You're not getting stuck because somebody's, leaving you stuck.
That's so interesting. I definitely think that in a law firm, it's important to have a bias to action. And I definitely remember learning that lesson of sending the emails that say, I propose we do this. I'm going to do this by X time. Because you can't be waiting on people.
Right.
So I very much relate to that. Well, I would love to, encourage all of you to ask questions if you have any. So please, feel free to type them into the chat, or if if you'd like to use your voices, we would love to hear them. So please feel free to, do the raise hand function and unmute yourself.
We have Devin there.
For some reason, I don't have the raise hand function. I only have clap or wave.
Oh, you know what? Then just go for it.
Oh, okay. Well, I have some questions. I know that you said you were, thank you for being here. I really appreciate it. This is like really amazing. I remember you from last year and you were really great too. And I feel like everybody remembered you the most, or one of the most.
Thank you.
How has your court changed during lockdown? I understand that you're on a panel with 2 other people. Is there like a lot of backlog? Do you have communication problems with your colleagues? How has the state been supporting you at home with your network and like giving you supplies that you might need?
So I'm really lucky because our chief was we've been ahead of the curve in terms of technology even before this happened. And then our chief was one of the leaders of that. And so we were really well positioned to go remote almost immediately. So the judges were all, most of the judges were amazing at working remotely. I didn't particularly like it, so I just kept saying, suck it up, buttercup, because this is what's going to happen. So, but we had a virtual private network system set up, so we weren't on Citrix. And then law firms teach you to also be thinking 2 to 5 steps ahead. So I had been saying to him before the lockdown, we really need to get Zoom or some other platform. And so we were exploring that by March 5th, I would say. And so we just had argument by telephone in March, but by April, every single one of our arguments was on Zoom. We have a YouTube channel now, and our arguments are live streamed. And we put out a manual that was a model for a lot of states in the rest of the country. So I've been very pleased. And we are Zooming with each other privately to decide cases, and to, like, my law clerk, I can have a Zoom call with her, or my intern. I tend to do it more with interns because I didn't have as long, I just got a new intern on Monday. So, I didn't have a pre-existing relationship with her. Like, the whole experience is going to be virtual for her. Yeah, so I feel like we've been really great. And for the most part, it's all gone very, very well. We have had a couple lawyers who didn't really fully understand the live streaming concept. So they were, crimping and fixing their hair. And there's one very hilarious video where the judge comes in and he's on his iPhone because for some reason his court issued laptop wasn't quite working, and he came in sideways. So there's this moment where every other person on the call realizes that he's literally sideways. But for the most part, it's really gone quite amazingly well. So I've been thrilled. And I actually can go to the office if I want. And since nobody else is going to the office, I do sometimes go there because, for one, I have a really big office, and 2, I have my own bathroom there, which I don't have here at home. So it's just kind of nice to, get to a different spot. I mean, when I get there, I bring my own lunch and I don't leave my office and, blah, blah, blah. And I can drive.
I've watched a couple of those live. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, I was gonna say I watched a couple of those live streams, but I don't see as many like.
No, go ahead.
And before you guys had the YouTube channel, there was like a link, and it would send you. You could just hear the audio of the panel, and you could hear the different judges asking questions to the lawyers. But I was wondering, like, now, do you feel like with this? Are you worried about seeing certain different types of cases? Like, are more cases more prevalent because they just have the privilege of being able to be over Zoom or over phone? Like, specifically, I know you deal with child abuse and child sexual misconduct. Are you worried like that's just being put on the sidelines during COVID, or they're making an effort to?
All of every kind of case we have is going forward. We just use pseudonyms. So for example, in a termination of parental rights case, we just say mother, father, child one, child two. You know, sometimes the lawyers blow that, at least in person, because they're supposed to do the same thing in person too. But I haven't seen anybody blow it since we've been on YouTube. And, you know, unfortunately, that is one of the downsides of my job, is there's far too much child abuse. But again, we just use pseudonyms. So we'll say Jane or Susan or Robert or whatever. I mean, we just give the Commonwealth, or somebody will give the child a random name, and that's what we use. So we try to use information that would protect their identity.
So you think you're seeing like the same amount of cases? Like, I know there's been some worry that because of COVID-19, other like those cases would be putting on like the back burner, like maybe people aren't getting, no?
No, all our cases are going forward. 1 month out of every 24, remember I told you there were 25 of us, the chief never is the emergency judge, but the other 24 of us rotate. So 1 month out of 24, we're the single justice or emergency judge. And I feel very bad for the current single justice, because all these people who are trying to get out of jail, if the trial court does not let them out, they're filing an emergency appeal. So the current single justice is getting overrun with these appeals. You know, we know evictions have been stopped, for example, jury trials have been stopped. So that's going to have an impact on our caseload at some point, but because I'm hearing appeals, everything we're looking at is all about what happened 12 to 18 months ago. So we are a little bit like the court system is a little bit like a tube of toothpaste, you know, and there's been a clamp put down, right? So we still have all that inventory that's, you know, before the clamp. And then there'll be a backlog of other kinds of inventory. Like when the evictions start happening again, you know, we're going to see this giant lump of foreclosures and evictions, you know. And I do wonder, I know people are talking about it, like, could we do something creative to, you know, either help the trial court or be specially assigned, or, you know, or, you know, we do have all these other non-case related projects we can do, and maybe we would take the time to go do those things.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, we're a very industrious group of people, so.
Great questions, Devin. Thank you. I see Netta raising her hand. So Netta, go ahead.
Thank you so much for coming and for sharing all of your advice. I'm Netta, and I also just wanted to say that I love Taekwondo, so it's so cool that your daughter's doing it too. And my question is, I was curious to know how you knew that law school and this career path was the right decision for you. So I'm going to be graduating this year, and I have a lot of career options. Law school has been something I've always thought about, but I'm still thinking through it, and I just want to make sure it's the right decision. And I'm wondering if you have any advice for what types of opportunities to keep exploring before I make that decision on when to apply.
Right. So I was saying, like, I had these friends who all had these passions, like anthropology or bugs, and I didn't have that same kind of passion, but I definitely liked arguing about things with people. I got excited by some of the courtroom drama things I'd seen. And so representing other people seemed like it could be a good career path for me. I would think now you could watch some court proceedings. You certainly can watch ours. We're not doing trials, but you know, and you can kind of get a sense of, do I find this interesting? Do I find it boring? I would think that the advantage of law schools being online right now is you could probably attend a class or two. And, you know, my thing about law school is I just worry about people who get into a lot of debt, because it is harder now, you know, to pay off that debt. So that's the one thing I just ask people to be careful about, is to have a plan. It took me, my debt, I graduated from Wellesley with $10,000 in debt, and with law school it was another 73, so it was like 83,000 in total. And my first year salary was say 69,000. So it took me like 6.5 years, maybe 7 years to pay that off. But that was also working at the height of the profession. But that 7 years did allow me to buy a house too, and to save for retirement. So I was doing some other things with the money. So
I think that financial piece is super important. So thank you for bringing that up, and definitely happy to talk through that with anybody who's trying to weigh the pros and cons.
Yeah, so that Wellesley woman I was telling you about, she got herself a job working for one of the computer research companies. I can't remember if it was Westlaw or Lexus. So she put in like 20 hours a week on the weekends and at night, helping people learn, with their legal research. And she didn't have any law school debt. So, I mean, I was like, she was hustling, man. Good for her.
Great question, Netta. I'm gonna move on to Laura Lynn. She's raising her hand.
Hi, thank you for being here. We really appreciate it. I also remember you from last year from the conference. So I just wanted to ask if you could talk about kind of life in a big law firm. I mean, we have all watched TV shows, but I'm not sure that's quite so accurate. And also talking about the path to partnership, and something for me has always been, I don't think I'll have kids if I decide to pursue this route. Can you talk about kind of balancing work life while working for a big firm and being so busy?
Sure. From what I can tell, everybody everywhere has work-life, I'll call it balancing issues, because there's no one balance. You just have to keep readjusting. So yeah, before I had children, I worked pretty hard. I was billing, which means I'm not talking about going to trainings or talking to my secretary. I mean, I was actually billing for my time, at least 2,000 hours. I was working very hard. I took me a while to learn that, you don't say, oh, I can't do that tonight because, I've got a dance class or I'm going to therapy. You just say, oh, I have a conflict. I can give that, I can't get it to you tonight by 9, but I could get it to you tonight by 11, or I could get it, so I could manage my schedule better. And then, I mean, once you establish yourself as a talented person, the firm wants to keep you. So, and they've also invested in you. So, they're looking for ways to make it work. And then some of it depends on you picking a firm that also has people who have children. So one of the reasons I picked Foley Hoag was because everybody had a spouse and children. I didn't at that time, but I thought, well, if everybody has that, then I can get that too. And then, other firms have a reputation as being a really party, and everybody, like they work hard, but they party hard, and they don't stay to make partner. Like, you have to go explore the different law firms and figure out what's a culture that is a good fit for you, just like you had to do with colleges. What's going to work for you.
Thanks.
And that's
so part of what you want to do too is you want to figure out the partnership track. Like when I started, you were put up for partner at the end of your 8th year, and that's what ended up happening with me. But all the firms changed the system. So you weren't put up for equity partner, you were put up for a non-equity partner tier. It was the new thing that was created. So yeah, that was unpleasant and, a disappointment, but they can do that. They can change the rules. So then I worked really hard for another several years, and then I made equity partner life.
Sorry, just to follow up, in terms of how much work it is as an associate versus as a partner, would you say there's much of a difference?
It depends on the firm, and it depends on how much work you bring in. Partnership is a little bit like a pie eating contest where the prize is pie, but you have to make your own world. Like when the last economic downturn happened in 2007, 2008, I would just rail at the women who were working part-time, and they were like, but if I end up working full-time, the firm trues it up. And I'm like, well, you know what? The economy is terrible, and all these guys are literally working part-time, and they're making full-time salary and maybe getting a bonus, and you are not, because you need permission to leave, so you ask for this part-time status. I'm like, stop doing that. All you're doing is cutting your paycheck by 20%. And you're working just as hard as they are, and you're not getting paid as much. It made me crazy. So, in fact, one of my colleagues was a partner at Ropes and Gray, which is a very prestigious firm. And, she ended up having 3 children. She worked part-time, some of it. She worked full-time, some of it. Like, you don't ask permission. You create the situation that you want that works for you. You do good work. People are going to want to keep you, going to want to help you to succeed.
That makes sense. Thank you.
I mean, anybody who does trial work, right to the, like, local county assistant district attorney. If you're in court all day, every day, 5 days a week, you have childcare issues. You just don't have the money to solve them like I had when I was at Foley Hoek, right? Because you're making a lot less money. I mean, my firm sent people to do a 3 or 4 month rotation there to pick up trial skills. And at the time that I was doing that rotation, I think I went in making, that was when the salaries were really increasing. And during my time, my salary increased to like $120,000. And my one salary paid more than all of the salaries of the other people doing work in the district court for that ADA's office. Every one of my colleagues at the ADA's office, the district assistant district attorneys, all had a second job. So they were working hard too. They were just making their money as a bartender or a waitress or a real estate agent.
Yeah. Those salaries are getting a little bit more livable now. And I know they just increased the salaries for the public defenders, but boy, it is tough. I have some questions, but I would like to and I know we're running short on time, so maybe I'll just throw one more out there, but I would like to let you all talk. So does anyone have one last question?
Well, while you're thinking about that, so I did have 2 children. I do have 2 children. People go, agonize over do I have them while I'm an associate? Do I have them while I'm a partner? And being a lesbian complicated things a little bit because we did not have the ready ingredients to make a baby. So I actually spent my spare time at the district attorney's office learning how to do that. And so there came a point where I was going to be up for partner, and I said to my wife, well, if we keep trying, then I will be on maternity leave when I'm up for partner. So we could stop for 3 months and not have that. Or we could just keep going. And we finally decided we were not going to put off our life and we were going to just keep trying. And of course, I was immediately pregnant, and I was, of course, on maternity leave when I was up for partner. It didn't matter. First of all, if it mattered to the firm, I wouldn't have wanted to work there. Partnership is a long-term proposition. So a short-term blip like a maternity leave is not relevant. So the firm made me partner, and then, we had a second baby 2 years and 12 days later. And then, I was done doing that. I had one case that went on for many, many years. I could have had a third baby on that case. But I went on with my life, right? And then the nice thing about working for a large law firm is that you have a fair amount of flexibility about your hours as long as you get the work done. Now, sometimes that means you're working at midnight or 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the morning, but I know my colleague would get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and work before her children woke up. I'm not a morning person, so that I'm like, nope, I will stay up till 4 in the morning and go to bed, but I'm not getting up at 5. Nope, not happening. And now, actually, life is so good because a lot of judges do half-day trials, which is amazing. Devin?
Okay, that's really interesting, like going right at partner. I mean, that's a long time away, but it's interesting to think about for later. I was wondering, you came from, I think a private corporation background, so it wasn't like you were in the public interest the whole life, and so you had to now you're in the public eye. Do you find that being a judge, being a justice particularly, do you find that there's a larger political aspect that you didn't really know about because you're trying to be an unbiased judge, but you also recognize that Governor Baker supported you and you have others that support you to make a certain type of decision, or do you just not worry about them?
Well, I mean, if you think you might want to be a judge, you live your whole life making sure you're very careful about what you say and when you say it, right? So one of my law school classmates, even, he was very funny. He was like, your Facebook posts are impeccable. Like, you never rant, you don't go into politics. I'm like, no, I don't, right? I mean, I registered as an independent, and then I would pull whatever party primary ballot and then always make sure I re-registered as an independent. So I was always very careful about those things. I do think there is some level of politicking, and I've mostly ignored it, and that's worked out okay for me. And I just, when I was applying to, or deciding when to apply to be on the appeals court, I got a lot of people who told me not to apply when I applied. It was the very beginning of the Baker administration, and they said, oh, he's going to be paying back political favors and this and that, and that I shouldn't apply then. And then other people were just as strongly like, no, the beginning of the administration where he's just said that he'll work with both parties and he wants to appoint people based on qualifications and not their politics, like he'll support you. And I mean, I just got pulled, back and forth. And in the end, I had a couple of people that I really trusted. They said they thought they would put in the application. It's been very common in the Commonwealth for the last 20 years for governors to say there aren't enough qualified women who apply. So I was like, okay, well, you're not gonna say that if I apply. I was applying either to be on the appeals court or to be on the trial court. And there were, at the beginning, there were 3 openings on the appeals court. So I figured even if he was paying back any political favors, 3 openings, maybe that 3rd one could be mine. And then it turned out there actually became 5 openings. And I was the 3rd one that he nominated. He nominated 3 of us on a slate. So I was on the very first slate of nominations. I also did, I did my homework. So I knew that he's got a brother who's gay. So I knew he was fine with gay people. So that wasn't going to be disqualifying like it would be for me or could have been for me on the federal level. And so, again, you just have to sort of figure out, okay, well, what makes sense, is this, what's my case? What's my case for why I would be a good nomination for him? But again, like you do your homework, right? Because I didn't know him. I had not met him. I did actually know Martha Coakley quite well. And so, I did my homework and I went and I watched some of the speeches he had given and I read speeches that he had given and I figured out the things that he thinks that I agree with, right? And so when I interviewed with his committee and with him, I was able to raise those points, right? His parents were of different political parties. And so he really, to his bone marrow, feels that you should be able to disagree agreeably. And I agree with that. Right. So that was something that I talked to him about. And that's something I try to live when the rare times when I do disagree with my colleagues.
Oh, thank you so much.
No,
I'm also trying to keep I do not do anything on Facebook, like just in case.
I mean, you can do stuff. I mean, I am on Facebook and I post stuff, but it's, it's just like laughing or a video of my dog or whatever. Like my daughter's going to graduate, I'll post a picture of her in her cap and gown, right? I just don't go on rants. And now I'm not allowed. They pretty much told us they didn't want us to be on LinkedIn. I think that now we could probably push back on that. If somebody's Facebook friends with me, they cannot appear before me. That's an ethical rule. So when I first came on, you could defriend people. So I was like, well, this is awkward, but so I defriended a bunch of people, but you still had to disclose that you defriended them. So one of my big accomplishments was to wait a year and then ask the ethics people, is there a time limit on that? Because this is getting ridiculous that I have to say that I defriended somebody so that they could argue before me. And so they took off the time limit and left it to our discretion. But you want people to feel like they got a fair hearing. You want them to get a fair hearing, but it's actually just as important for them to feel they got a fair hearing. And so, we do that.
Well, I am mindful that we are 5 minutes over time and we so appreciate your time. But before we close, I wanted to find out, Justice Henry, if it would be okay if we share where your daughter is going to college.
Yes, my daughter is Wellesley, class of 2024.
Oh.
So I'll have to look out for her, hopefully on campus in the fall. I definitely hope to see her in career education. We'll give her a warm welcome.
Great, great. Well, I wish all of you luck. And, I do think that, you take the class, you do the best you can on the LSAT and you go from there, and whatever you have, that's what you sell, right? So, you get the best opportunity you can have, and then you look for opportunities there and you get those opportunities and you build.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again so much. And thank you to everyone for coming. It was really great to have your questions and so much participation. I appreciate it.
Excellent. Good luck, everybody.
Good luck. Take care.